Some people run because they are cowards, and some run because it is the last brave thing left to do. Lynette Sowerby had never been able to explain the difference to anyone, because the only person who might have understood it was the very man she had run from. 5 years ago, she walked out of a lit ballroom while the music was still playing, took nothing but the gown on her back and a small brass compass folded inside her glove, and vanished into the dark as though she had never drawn a breath in that house at all. She let the whole of London believe she had abandoned him for something better. She let him believe it most of all. What none of them knew, what he above all did not know, was that she had not left empty-handed. And when the Duke of Wexmoor at last found her, at the cold grey rim of the country and 5 years too late, he did not shout. He did not reach for the child. He knelt down in the mud, and he waited. The morning the past came for her, Lynette was on her knees in the physic garden, cutting the last of the marshmallow root before the frost could turn it to string. Hertsmere sat where the moor gave up and slid into the sea, a scatter of low stone houses the colour of wet slate, a harbour that held 9 fishing boats when the weather was kind and 6 when it was not. It was the sort of place a person came to only if they had run out of country to put behind them. That was precisely why she had chosen it. For 5 years, the wind off the water had scoured her clean of the woman she had been, and she had let it. She heard her son before she saw him, the slap of small boots on the shingle path and the outraged honking of the gander who followed him everywhere like a bad conscience. "Mama, Admiral has eaten the string again," Rafe announced, arriving breathless at the garden wall. He was not yet 5, all knees and questions, with a cowlick that would not lie flat no matter how she wet it. All of it, and now the kite will not fly, and it is entirely his fault, and he is not sorry. The gander, one-eyed and enormous and devoted, waddled up behind the boy and regarded Lynette with the single yellow eye of a creature who had never been sorry for anything in his life. "Then we will make more string," Lynette said, and sat back on her heels to look at her son, which was a thing she did perhaps 40 times a day and would never tire of. He had her stubborn chin. Everything else, the height of him, the set of his shoulders, the dark hair, belonged to another man. And his eyes were the trouble. They were a pale, clear grey, the colour of the sea under cloud, ringed at the edge with a darker slate. And they were not her eyes, and they were not any Sowerby eyes. They were vain eyes. On the worst nights, she lay awake, certain that any stranger who looked at her boy for more than a moment would read his whole birthright written plain across his face. She had been telling herself all that time that no stranger ever would. That here, at the edge of everything, no one who mattered would ever come. She was wrong by 9 o'clock that same morning. The carriage came down the single street with its lamps still lit against the sea fog, a travelling coach far too fine for Hertsmere, mud to the axle, 4 horses blowing hard. It did not belong here any more than a swan belonged in a herring net. Lynette felt the wrongness of it in her teeth before she understood it. She rose, wiping the black soil from her hands onto her apron, and watched it pass the chapel and the smithy and roll to a stop outside the Feathers, the only inn the village owned. A boy ran to the horses. A man stepped down. Even at that distance, even before she could see his face, her body knew him. It knew him the way a struck bell knows the hammer. It was in the way he stood, the particular stillness of a man who had learned to fill a room without moving, and in the drag, faint but there, of his right boot as he came down the step. She had watched that man cross 100 yards of polished floor toward her once, 5 years and a lifetime ago, and she had never in all that time managed to unlearn the shape of him. Leander Vane had come to Hertsmere. For a moment the grey street was not there at all. She was 19 again, and standing at the edge of the Renshaw ballroom in a borrowed gown 2 seasons out of fashion, hired on for the evening as companion to a deaf old dowager, invisible as a chair against the wall, and she had glanced up and found a tall, dark man watching her across the whole width of the room. Not the way men watched a hired companion, quick and dismissive and already looking past her. He had looked at her as though she were a question he meant to spend the rest of his life answering. He had crossed to her through all that whirl of silk and candlelight, passing 3 young ladies of good family who turned prettily to catch him on the way, and he had bowed to the girl in the outgrown gown as though she were the only woman in England, and he had said, "I do not dance, my leg forbids it, but I find I would give a great deal to stand at that cold window with you and be talked about." And she, who had never once in her sensible life done a reckless thing, had laughed and taken his arm. That had been the whole beginning of it. One waltz they never danced, and a life ruined and made and ruined again, all of it born from a man deciding to cross a room. Lynette did not remember deciding to move. She was simply suddenly inside the cottage with the door shut and her back against it and her heart going like a hare's, and Rafe was staring up at her with his string forgotten in his fist. "Mama, you are white as the wash." "I am well," she said, and heard the lie of it. She knelt and gripped his shoulders harder than she meant to. "Rafe, listen to me. I want you to stay in the garden today. Right in the garden behind the wall where I can see you. Not the shore, not the street. Do you understand me?" "Is it the fever men?" Widow Coyle said, "If I do not eat my greens, the fever men will." "There are no fever men." She smoothed the cowlick that would not stay smoothed. "It is only that I have a great deal to do, and I want you near. Will you do this for me, for a sweet from the tin?" He considered the bribe with the gravity of a magistrate, then nodded and ran to tell the gander the terms. Lynette stood in the dim of her own kitchen with the dried herbs turning slowly overhead and made herself breathe. He would not know the village. He would not know her name. Sowerby was not the name she had worn in London. He was here for some other reason. A wreck, a road, a piece of the coast the Crown wished mapped. Rich men came north for 100 reasons, and none of them were her. She would keep the boy close for a day, 2 days, and the fine carriage would turn round and carry the past back where it belonged, and she would go on breathing at the edge of the sea. She almost believed it. She kept the boy in for the whole of that grey morning, and the whole of the afternoon, and by the time the light began to fail, she had half persuaded herself the danger had passed. Then she went to fetch water from the well at the top of the lane, and she looked down toward the harbour, and her heart stopped in her chest. Rafe was on the shore. He had slipped out the low gate at the seaward side of the garden, the one she always meant to mend and never did, and he was down on the shingle where the tide had gone out, and he was not alone. A tall man in a dark travelling coat was crouched beside him at the water's edge. The 2 dark heads were bent together over something in the sand. The gander stood guard 3 feet off, hissing without conviction. Lynette dropped the bucket. She ran. She ran the way you run in a dream, the lane stretching longer under her feet, the wind stealing her voice before it could reach him, and every step she saw more of it, saw the man reach down, saw the small pale object in her son's cupped hands, saw the man go very still. It was the compass. Rafe had taken the brass compass, the one thing she had carried out of that ballroom, the one thing she had never been able to make herself sell or bury or throw into the sea, and he had taken it down to the shore to watch the needle swing, and he had dropped it in a tide pool, and the fine stranger had knelt in the wet sand to fish it out for him. Leander Vane was holding the compass in his scarred hand, and he was looking at the boy. She reached them, and she could not speak. She stood on the shingle with the breath tearing in and out of her, and she waited for it, the recognition, the fury, the terrible words that would end the only life she had managed to build. She waited for him to stand and turn and level all his ruin at her. He did none of it. He did not stand. He stayed crouched down in the cold, wet sand at the boy's height, so that a small child would not have to crane his neck at a giant, and he turned the compass over once in his fingers, and he pressed it gently back into Rafe's palm and closed the boy's fingers over it. And only then did he lift his head and look at her. And Lynette saw that he had understood everything. She saw it move across his face like a shadow crossing water, the sums being done, the eyes, the age, the compass, 5 years, all of it landing at once. She saw a man take the single hardest blow of his life standing down on his knees in the sand. "Rafe," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. Go to the house. Take Admiral. There is a sweet in the tin. You have earned 2. But the man was showing me north, Rafe protested, though he was already backing toward the garden, sensing the weather in his mother's face. North is that way. He knew without even looking. To the house. The boy went, the gander waddling after, honking its opinion of the entire proceeding. And then there were only the 2 of them on the darkening shore, and the tide coming in grain by grain, and all the silence of those years standing up between them like a wall. Leander rose. He did it slowly, favoring the right leg, and even so he came up to his full height, and she had forgotten, she had made herself forget, how the man could blot out a sky. The fog had beaded silver in his dark hair. The scar she did not remember, a thin white line from cheekbone to jaw that had not been there before, some gift of the years she had missed. His eyes, when they found hers, were not cruel. That was the unbearable part. They were only wrecked. "His name is Rafe," Leander said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, weathered down to gravel. "You called him Rafe. Your Grace. Do not." The word came out quiet and terrible. "Do not stand on my shore and give me a title, Lynette. Not now. Not after that." She lifted her chin. It was the only defense she had ever truly owned, that chin, and she had spent 5 years sharpening it. "You should not have come here." "No," he agreed. "I should have come 4 years ago. I should have torn the whole of England apart stone by stone until I found you. I did not because I was told very carefully and by people I trusted that you did not wish to be found." He looked past her, up the lane, to where a small boy and a one-eyed goose were disappearing through a garden gate. "It seems I was told a great many things. Go back to the inn, Leander." His name came out of her before she could stop it, and it cost her something to say it, some last coin she had been hoarding. "Go back to the inn and go back to London and let us alone. There is nothing for you here." He looked at her for a long moment. The sea hissed up the shingle and drew back. Somewhere behind them a curlew cried the loneliest sound in the world. "There is a boy of not yet 5 years with my grandmother's eyes," he said softly. "And there is you. Do not tell me there is nothing here." Lynette turned and walked up the lane on legs she could not feel, and she did not run, because she would not give him that, and she went into her cottage and shut the door and slid the bolt she had never once had cause to use in 5 years. She stood with her back against the wood and pressed her fist to her mouth. Through the small window, over the top of the garden wall, she could see the shore. She watched, expecting him to follow, to hammer at her door, to send for a magistrate, to do any of the 100 things a duke could do to a woman who had no name and no rank and no friend within 100 miles. He did none of those things. He climbed the low sea wall, and he sat down upon it in the failing light with his back to her house and his face to the water, one leg stretched stiff before him, and he settled there as a man settles who has decided he is going nowhere at all. The fog came in and grayed him at the edges. The dark came down. And still, when she blew out her candle at midnight and dared to lift the corner of the curtain, she could see the shape of him against the pale line of the surf, sitting on the cold stone, waiting, as though he had all the time in the world and every last hour of it belonged to her. He was still there at dawn. Lynette saw him when she came down to rake the fire, a dark figure on the grey wall exactly where the dark had left him, and for one wild moment she thought the cold had killed him in the night, and she would have to answer for a dead duke on her seawall. Then he shifted and turned up his collar, and she understood that he had simply chosen to sit out a November night on wet stone rather than let her out of his reach, and somehow that was worse. She sent Rafe to Widow Coyle's with a basket and a great many instructions, and then she put on her cloak and went out to have it done with. "You will catch your death," she said, stopping a careful 6 feet from the wall. "And then I will be a woman with a dead peer outside her gate, and no way on earth to explain him." "I have slept in worse," Leander said without turning. "Spain taught me the trick of it. You will find a man can sleep anywhere once he has stopped believing he deserves a bed." He said it lightly, and it landed like a stone dropped down a well. Sit with me, Linnet. I am not going to seize the boy. If that is the fear that kept your bolt drawn all night, put it down. I could not lift my own leg off this wall without help, let alone lift a child from his mother. You expect me to trust the word of a man who followed me to the end of the earth? I expect nothing. Now he did look at her, and the morning light was no kinder to him than the dusk had been. He looked like a man who had been awake for longer than one night. I have not earned the right to expect anything of you. I am aware of that. I only ask to be allowed to stay in the village. At the inn, on the wall, wherever you will suffer me. I will not come to your door unless you open it. I will not speak to the boy unless you stand between us the whole while. But I will not leave this coast until I understand what was done to us, both of us. Because I am beginning to believe, Linnet, that neither of us knows the half of it. She wanted to tell him that she knew the whole of it, that she had lived every hour of the why, that there was no mystery here but the ordinary cruelty of powerful families toward women who reach above their station. She wanted to. But there was something in the way he had said it, both of us, that hooked into her and would not let go, and against every instinct she had honed over 5 hard years, she took 2 steps and sat down on the far end of the cold wall. One question, she said. You may have one, and then you will go to the inn and sleep in a bed like a Christian, and we will see about the rest tomorrow. He was quiet for a while. The tide was out and the wet sand shone like beaten pewter. When he spoke, his voice had gone carefully even, the voice of a man walking on ice. The night of the Renshaw ball, he said. I left you by the terrace doors to fetch your shawl because you were cold, and you told me the cold suited you, and I did not believe you. I was gone a quarter hour. When I came back, you were gone, not stepped away. Gone. A woman came to me weeping and named herself your aunt, and she said you had taken the night coach south with a gentleman of means, that it had all been arranged some weeks in advance, that I was a fool who had mistaken a clever girl's ambition for something finer. I believed her, because grief will make a man believe anything that wounds him. His jaw worked. Within a fortnight, the story was everywhere. That Miss Linnet had thrown over a duke for a richer purse and slipped away laughing. I was made a figure of fun in every drawing room in London, and I did not care about that. I cared that you had done it without a word. So here is my one question, and I have carried it 5 years to ask it. Was it true? Any part of it? Was there a richer purse? Linnet stared at him. For 5 years she had built her defenses against every attack she could imagine, against his rage, his rank, his lawyers, his grief. She had never once, in all her careful planning, prepared herself for this, that he had been fed a lie so perfectly shaped to wound him that he had spent 5 years believing she had left him for money. There was no purse, she said, and the words came out cracked. There was no gentleman. Leander, there was no coach south. And I have no aunt. I never had one. My mother's people are long dead, and my father left me nothing but a name and a box of instruments. Whoever stood before you claiming my blood was a liar bought and coached for the purpose, set there to say those exact words, chosen so that you would never once think to come looking for me. She watched the ice go out from under his feet. You are telling me, he said slowly, that you did not go willingly. I am telling you I have not the smallest idea what you were told, or by whom, and that not one word of it was mine. She stood, because she could not bear to be sitting when the ground was moving like this. And that is a second question you have tricked out of me, and I have answered more than I should, and I am going in. Linnet. No. She was shaking. You do not understand what you are pulling on. There are reasons I left, good reasons, hard reasons, reasons that had a knife at the throat of everything I loved. If you go dragging them up into the light, you will not free us. You will only get the knife moving again. Some walls are built to keep the roof up. Pull them down and see what falls. She pulled her cloak tight. Sleep at the inn. Do not come to my door. She left him on the wall and did not look back, and she was proud of that for almost the length of the lane, until she reached her own gate and found she was weeping, silently and furiously, at the simple, unbearable fact that he had thought her for sale. He kept his word. That was the maddening thing. For 3 days the Duke of Wexmoor lodged at the Feathers and did not come to her door once. He paid for his room in coin that made the innkeeper's wife go faint. He walked the shore each morning at a careful distance. He fell into conversation with the fishermen, and being a man who had commanded rougher men than these in worse places, was soon tolerated among them, then grudgingly liked, which irritated Linnet beyond all reason. Twice she saw him from her window sitting on the harbour steps, while Rafe, whom she could not chain to the garden forever, showed him the great and secret business of throwing pebbles at the sea. She let it happen from a distance. She told herself she was watching for danger. She was not entirely lying. What unsettled her was not that the boy liked him. Children liked anyone who took them seriously, and the Duke, for all his grave stillness, took Rafe with perfect seriousness, as though the correct name of a goose and the reason the sea went out twice a day were matters of state. What unsettled her was watching her son stand beside the man and seeing, plain as a printed page, the very thing she had spent 5 years hiding. The same tilt of the dark head, the same trick of going still just before he laughed, the same squint at the horizon as though daring it to move first. Anyone with eyes could read it. The fishermen were kind and could not read, and did not think to try, but the world beyond Heartsmere was neither kind nor unlettered, and every hour the Duke lingered was another hour the secret sat out in the open salt air where any passing stranger might stoop and pick it up. She told herself it was fear she watched them with, and not the other thing, the low, sweet ache of seeing the two dark heads bent together at the edge of the water, the one picture she had forbidden herself to imagine for 5 long years. It was on the 4th day that the danger came, and it did not wear a duke's face. She was at the Feathers herself, trading a jar of chest salve for a week of the innkeeper's ale money, when Mrs. Pettifer leaned across the bar and dropped her voice. "There was a man asking after you," the innkeeper's wife said. "Not his grace. Another. Came through Tuesday last, before the fine carriage, a lean sour fellow with a lawyer's coat and a face like a shut purse, asking had we a woman in the village, come these 5 years or so on her own, with a young child, a boy child particular. Mrs. Pettifer's kind eyes were worried. I told him we had a dozen widows and no shortage of boys, which is God's truth, and I sent him on to Cold Harbor up the coast. But I did not like him, Linnet. He did not ask like a man who had lost someone. He asked like a man who had been sent to fetch a parcel." The floor of the world tilted very gently beneath Linnet's feet. "His name," she managed. "Did he give a name?" "Crail." Mrs. Pettifer said it like something distasteful found in the flour. "Mr. Crail. Said he was in the way of finding lost persons for particular families. I did not care for the way he said families. Crail." She did not know the name, but she knew the shape of it at once, the way you know a spider by its web before you ever see the spider. A lean, sour man in a lawyer's coat, sent by a particular family to fetch a parcel that was a woman and a boy child particular. She had always known this day would come. She had simply let herself forget it, these last soft years, let the sea and the garden and the boy lull her into believing that the arm of the man she feared was not long enough to reach this far north. It was long enough. It had always been long enough. She had only bought herself 5 years of borrowed quiet, and the loan had just been called. She walked home in the failing light with her heart hammering and her mind already 3 counties away, already counting coins and packing the compass and the good knife and Rafe's winter boots, already choosing between the 2 roads out of Heartsmere and hating both. She had done it before. She could do it again. She would go tonight, while the Duke slept at the inn believing he had all the time in the world, and by the time either man knew she was gone, she would be a rumour in another grey village at the end of another lane. She knew the arithmetic of running the way other women knew the arithmetic of a household. You went at night and on foot, the first mile at the very least, because a hired carriage could be traced, and a woman walking in the dark was only a shadow among shadows. You took coin sewn into a hem and never a purse. You took the child asleep, so that he could not later be remembered saying anything a driver might repeat. You left the fire laid and the washing on the line, so the neighbors would believe you meant to return by supper, and you said your goodbyes to no living soul, Because a goodbye was a thread, and threads could be pulled, and following pulled threads was precisely how lean men in lawyers' coats earned their bread. She had done it once already, out of a great warm house in London with everything in the world to lose. She could do it again out of a cold cottage with almost nothing. And the almost nothing was the whole trouble of it. Because the almost nothing was a boy who had friends now, and a goose he loved past all reason, and a garden he had pressed the seeds into with his own fat fingers, and a name he came running to, and an entire small world built exactly to his size. She was about to fold the whole of it into a bundle and carry it off into the dark on the strength of a stranger's threat and a lawyer's hat. The unfairness of it rose in her throat like a fist. She was so bone-tired of being the sort of woman the world felt free to make run. She came round the last bend of the lane with the plan half made, and she stopped. There was a man standing at her garden gate in the dusk. Not the Duke. This man was lean and stooped and dressed in black, and he stood with the patient stillness of a bailiff, and he was looking at her cottage with his head tilted the way a man tilts his head to read a name on a door. As she watched, frozen at the bend, he lifted the latch of her gate with one gloved finger, as though he were already measuring what was his to take. Rafe was inside that gate. Rafe and the gander and the whole of her stolen quiet life. The man had not seen her yet. She had one breath, perhaps two, to decide what kind of woman she was going to be. Linnet did not scream, and she did not run, because both would have told him everything he had come to learn. Instead, she made her face into the blank, tired mask of a village healer at the end of a long day, and she came round the bend at an ordinary pace, and she said, in a voice pitched flat and unremarkable, "You will want to take your hand off my gate, sir. I have a dog inside that does not care for strangers, and I am too tired tonight to stitch you back together after." The man turned. Mrs. Pettifer had described him to the life. Lean, sour, a face like a shut purse, and eyes that went over Linnet the way a clerk's finger goes down a column of figures, adding her up, checking her against a sum he already carried. She saw the exact moment the total pleased him. It was the smallest tightening at the corner of his mouth, and she hated it more than she had hated anything in 5 years. "Mistress Sowerby," said Mr. Crail, and made her false name sound like an accusation. "Or ought I to use the name you wore in town?" "No. I see I need not. Your face does the work for me." He did not smile. "I represent a family with an interest in your welfare, and in the welfare of the child. There is a carriage that could be here by Thursday. Comfortable, discreet. It would be so much easier for everyone, mistress, if you were reasonable. The last woman in your position was not reasonable, and it went hard for her." "I have no idea what family you mean," Linnet said. "I am a widow. My husband was a mate on a collier and the sea took him. My boy is a fisherman's son. You have walked a very long way to frighten the wrong woman." "The compass," Crail said pleasantly, "is engraved with a stag and the letters LV. I am told the boy carries it about like a toy, a fisherman's son with a duke's compass. You will forgive me if I do not walk away." Linnet's blood went to water, and then a shadow fell across the gate between her and Crail, and a voice she had spent 3 days trying to be rid of said very mildly, "You are on private land, and you are speaking to a lady, and I find I dislike both of those things at once." Leander had come up the lane behind her, silent for a big man, and he did not raise his voice and he did not lift a hand. And Crail went the color of tallow all the same. Because whatever else the lean man was, he was a man who knew faces and prices, and he had just recognized both. "Your Grace," Crail said, and swept off his hat, and the deference was oilier than the threat had been. "I did not look to find you here. This is a fortunate meeting. I am about my employer's business, and my employer, I think, is very well known to you. Indeed, you might say we serve the same house." "I have no employer," Leander said, "and I keep no man who threatens women at gates. Give me the name of the fool who sent you, and I will save you the trouble of carrying my answer back yourself. But Crail had recovered his footing, and Linnet watched with dread as the sour intelligence returned to his eyes. "Now that," he said softly, "is between me and the gentleman who pays me. I would not wish to speak out of turn, your grace. Families are delicate. I am sure it will all be made plain to you in time, by those closer to you than I. Good evening to you both. And mistress." He set his hat back on. "Thursday. Do be reasonable. The child would travel so much more comfortably with his mother's consent than without it." He walked away down the lane into the dark, unhurried, a man entirely confident that time was on his side, and neither of them stopped him, because to stop him was to admit there was something worth stopping him over, and the admission was the very thing Linnet had spent 5 years not making. The gate swung on its hinge. Inside the cottage, a small window glowed. Rafe was singing to the gander, tunelessly and at the top of his lungs, entirely safe and entirely unaware, and the sound of it undid Linnet more than any threat could have. "Come inside," she said to Leander. The words tasted strange. She had bolted her door against this man 4 nights running. "Not for you, for the boy. If that man comes back tonight, I would rather not face him alone, and you are the only weapon I have to hand." It was the first time in 5 years that she had let anyone but Rafe cross her threshold. The cottage was small and warm and full of the green smell of drying herbs, and Leander Vane, Duke of Wexmoor, master of 40,000 acres, and a house you could lose a village in, folded himself onto a stool by her fire as carefully as a man setting down something breakable. Rafe looked up from the hearthrug, took in the giant now installed in his kitchen, and reached the swift, merciless conclusions of the very young. "You are the Northman," Rafe said, "from the shore. Did you come for supper? We have fish. We always have fish. Admiral does not like you, but Admiral does not like anyone, so do not take it personal." "I would be glad of supper," said the Duke of Wexmoor gravely, "and I will do my best to win the good opinion of Admiral, though I suspect it is a long campaign." "It is," Rafe agreed. "He bit a bishop once." Linnet turned to the fire so that neither of them would see her face, and she cooked. And while she cooked, she listened to her son tell a duke the entire history of a one-eyed goose, and she thought her heart might simply stop from the strain of holding itself together. They did not speak of the important things while the boy was awake. That was an unspoken treaty struck across the top of Rafe's head. They spoke of the gander and the tides, and why the moon was sometimes a coin and sometimes a claw, and the Duke, who Linnet had only ever known as a grave and guarded man, answered every impossible question as though it were a matter of state. When at last Rafe's head began to nod, Linnet carried him up the ladder to the little loft bed and tucked the compass into his fist because he would not sleep without it, and came back down to find Leander standing at her work table with his back to her, looking at the ranks of little jars and the bundles of root and the mortar worn smooth with use. "You did all this," he said. "It was not a question. You have no name, no family that will own you, no coin but what you make with your 2 hands, and you built this. You keep a whole village on its feet with it, I have heard. The fishermen say Mistress Sowerby has brought more of their children through the winter fevers than the doctor at Cold Harbour ever did sober." He turned. "I spent 5 years imagining you in silks in some rich man's house, laughing at what a fool I had been. And all the while you were here, up to your wrists in other people's illnesses, keeping our son alive on marshmallow root and stubbornness." "Do not," Linnet said. "Do not make me into something noble. I did what I had to do. There was nothing fine in it." "There was everything fine in it." He crossed the little room and stopped an arm's length from her, and did not close the last of the distance, and she understood that he never would unless she permitted it, and the restraint of him was harder to bear than any grasping would have been. "Linnet, 4 nights I have sat on your wall and turned it over, and I cannot make the sum come right. A man told me you left me for money. Tonight another man comes to your gate and threatens to take a child away, our child, with or without your consent, and speaks of a family and a house and my grace as though I am the last to be let in on a thing everyone else has long understood. Someone has been standing between us for 5 years, someone with reach and patience and a reason. I mean to have his name." Lynette looked at him for a long moment. The fire snapped. Overhead, the small, even breathing of the boy came down through the loft boards. "If I tell you," she said, and her voice had dropped to almost nothing, "you will go to war. I know you. You will go to war, and you will lose, because the man who did this holds every card there is to hold, and I have spent 5 years learning exactly how many that is. He did not merely tell you a lie, Leander. He came to me, in private, the night of the ball, and he showed me a paper." "What paper?" "A contract." The word cost her. "A marriage contract, drawn and signed and sealed, binding you to a girl I had never met, the daughter of a house that could give yours what a healer's child never could. He told me the wedding was set. He told me that if I did not go quietly that very night, if I ever breathed a word of what was between us, he would see to it that the child I did not yet know I carried was named baseborn in every court in England, and that you, Leander, you would be ruined along with me for the folly of it, your name, your estate, your sister's marriage. All of it pulled down into the mud with the healer's girl who reached above her station." A tear went down her face, and she let it. "So I ran, not for a purse, for you. I ran to keep the roof up, and I have kept it up alone for 5 years, and I would have kept it up until I died. And you have come and put your hand to the beam, and I am so frightened of what falls." The silence after was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Leander had gone very white and very still, and the scar stood out on his jaw like a seam. "There was no contract," he said. "I was never bound to any girl. There was no wedding set. Lynette, I would have married you at dawn in a barn if you had let me. Whoever showed you that paper showed you a forgery." "I know that now," she whispered. "I did not know it then. I was 19 and alone, and he was a great man of your own blood, and the paper had a seal on it, and I believed him, because I had been taught my whole life that people like me do not get to keep things like you." She wiped her face. "You want his name? I will give you his name. But hear me first. If you go at him like a bull, he will destroy us both before the month is out, because everything he threatened 5 years ago, he can still do tomorrow. The boy is still baseborn in the eyes of the law. You are still unwed. Nothing has changed except that now there are 2 men hunting my son instead of 1, and one of them is sitting at my fire. I am not hunting him." Leander's voice shook, which she had never heard it do, not once, not even at the terrace doors 5 years gone. "Lynette, look at me. I am not hunting our son. I am trying to find a way to stand in front of him." And she believed him. That was the terrible, dangerous, unforgivable thing. After 5 years of trusting no living soul but a child and a goose, she looked at the wrecked grey eyes of the man she had ruined her own life to protect, and she believed him, and she felt the great cold wall she had built around herself give 1 slow inch. "His name," she said, "is Osric Vane, your uncle, the man who raised you." Leander did not move. But something went out of the room when she said it, some last light, and what came into his face in its place frightened her more than Crail had, more than the forged contract, more than any of it. "Then we have both been robbed by the same hand," he said quietly. "Get your boots, Lynette, and the boys, and whatever you cannot bear to leave. We are not sleeping in this cottage tonight." "Why?" But she was already reaching for her cloak, 5 years of running snapping back into her hands like a habit that had never left. "What is it? What do you know that I do not?" Leander was at the window, looking down the black lane where Crail had gone, and when he spoke his voice had the flat calm of a man who has just understood he is standing on a trap door. "Because Crail did not come north to threaten you," he said. "He came to find you, and he has found you. And a man like my uncle does not send his hound the whole length of England and then sit in London awaiting a letter. He came north behind the hound, Lynette, or very near it. He is close, which means the only question left is a simple one." He turned from the window. How fast can a woman, a child, and a lame duke move when the man who has hunted them for 5 years is very nearly at the door? Outside, far off down the coast road, thin and unhurried and unmistakable, came the sound of a horn. They went out the back of the cottage into the dark, and Linnet did not take the road. The road was what Krail would watch. The road was what any ordinary frightened woman would take, and Linnet had stopped being an ordinary frightened woman 5 years ago and become something quieter and far more dangerous, a person who understood that the safest path was always the one that looked like no path at all. She took them up the beck instead, the thin stream that spilled off the moor behind the houses, wading ankle-deep in the black freezing water, because running water kept no footprints, with Rafe heavy and half asleep against her shoulder, and the compass fast in his fist, and the gander bringing up the rear like a small, outraged sergeant who had not been consulted. Leander came behind her and did not complain, though she could hear what the climb cost him, the sharp catch in his breath each time the bad leg took his weight on the wet stones. He did not ask where they were going. He did not try to take the lead, or the child, or the choosing of it. He only followed the woman who knew the ground, and Linnet, who for 5 years had been followed by no one and had led no one but a boy and a goose, found that she could hardly bear the trust of it. The bothy stood high on the moor where the last wall gave out, a shepherd's hut of piled stone with half a roof and a hearth black with 100 years of other people's fires. She knew it because she had come here in summers to cut the herbs that grew only in high wild places, and because a healer learns every roof within a day's walk that will keep the rain off a body. She got the fire lit from the tinder in her satchel, the same satchel she had snatched from its hook without thinking, the way another woman might snatch a child, because to Linnet her craft and her child were very nearly the same thing, the two means by which she had kept them both alive. It was somewhere past midnight that Rafe began to burn. She felt it before he woke, the heat coming off him where he lay against her, and her healer's hand went to his forehead, and her mother's heart dropped straight through the floor of the world. The cold water, the wet climb, the fright. She knew a dozen roads a chill could take in a small body, and half of them ended in a small grave, and she had watched other women's children go down those roads, and she had never once, in all her competence, learned how to be calm when the child was her own. Fever, she said, and hated how her voice shook. Leander, he has a fever. It came so fast, they come so fast in the little ones. And here was the thing she had not let herself expect. He did not panic, and he did not take charge, and he did not stand over her being a duke. He knelt down on the earth floor across the child from her, and he said, low and steady, "Tell me what you need and where it is, and I will fetch and carry, and you will do the part only you can do. I have watched field surgeons work with the guns still going. I know how to be a pair of hands and nothing more." So she made him a pair of hands. She sent him down the black slope to the beck with the ewer for cold water, and he went and came back without a word, though the going must have been agony. She had him keep the fire fed to a low, even warmth while she stripped the boy to his shirt and bathed the heat off his skin. She brewed her willow bark and her elderflower over the coals, and got it into Rafe a bitter spoonful at a time, murmuring the small nonsense a mother murmurs, while the boy tossed and cried out for Admiral, who had wedged himself against the child's side and would not be moved. And through the worst of it, the 2 hours before dawn when the fever climbed to its cruel summit and Rafe did not know either of them, and called out for people who were not there, Leander sat with the boy's burning hand in his great scarred one, and did not once let go. There is a particular intimacy that has nothing to do with courtship, and Linnet met it that night for the first time. It is the intimacy of two people bent over the same small failing body in the dark, breathing in time without meaning to, passing a cloth or a cup between them without a word because words would only waste the breath the work required. She had done this alone so many times, in so many cold, borrowed rooms, that she had come to believe the loneliness was somehow part of the medicine. It was not. When Rafe cried out and arched away from her cooling cloth, it was Leander who gathered the boy up against his own chest and held him steady while she worked, murmuring the low nonsense of a man gentling a frightened colt. and the child quieted for him as he had not quieted for her, and Linnet felt no jealousy in it at all, only a relief so vast it frightened her worse than the fever had. She had carried this boy up out of the dark by herself for 5 years. To hand even one single hour of that weight to another pair of hands, and to have those hands be strong and gentle, and his, was a thing she had not once let herself imagine since a night at a terrace door. "He is strong," Leander said into the dark, and it was not a question, and it was not quite a prayer. "He is," Linnet said. "He is the strongest small thing I have ever known. He has had to be." The fever broke a little after first light. She felt it turn under her hand the way she had felt 100 fevers turn, the skin going from dry fire to damp cool, the wild breathing settling into the deep, even sleep of a body that has decided to live. Rafe sighed and burrowed into the goose and slept. And Linnet, who had held herself together through the whole of the night by main force, felt the fear go out of her all at once, and leave nothing behind to stand on, and she put her face in her hands and shook. Leander did not gather her up. He did not tell her it was over, or that she had been brave, or any of the useless things. He simply moved around the sleeping child and sat down beside her, close, his shoulder against hers, and he waited, the way he had waited on her sea wall, the way he seemed prepared to wait for the rest of his life. And after a while Linnet turned without deciding to and pressed her wet face against the rough wool of his coat, and his arm came round her slowly, asking nothing, and she let it. For the first time in 5 years, she let another grown soul hold some part of the weight, and the strangeness of not being alone was so great that it hurt worse than the fear had. "You did all of this alone," he said against her hair. It was not pity. She would have known pity and struck it away. It was something closer to awe and to grief. Every fever, every dark hour, every road, alone, because a man came to you in a lit room 5 years ago and told you a lie with a seal on it, and you believed you were saving me by carrying the whole of it yourself. His arm tightened. "I called it cowardice, Linnet. In the drawing rooms when they laughed, I let them think you a coward, because it was easier to be angry than to grieve. And all the while it was the bravest thing I have ever heard of a soul doing. You gave up everything you wanted to keep me from a ruin that did not even exist." "Do not," she whispered. "I am too tired to be made noble tonight. Then I will make you noble tomorrow and every day after, until you are sick of it." She felt rather than saw him smile, and it undid something in her. "Rest now. I have you. Both of you." They talked, low, while the boy slept and the grey light strengthened at the broken window. He told her the 5 years from his side, the years she had only been able to imagine. How Osric, who had raised him from a boy of 11 after the old Duke died, had wound himself so deep into the running of everything that Leander had scarcely noticed the estate quietly bleeding. How every attachment Leander formed had somehow soured, every match come to nothing, always for reasons that seemed at the time to be simply the world's bad luck. How for 2 years now he had felt the ground shifting under him and not understood why. The tenants restless, the accounts thin, his uncle always at his elbow, always so very helpful. He told her smaller things too, in the low voice men keep only for the dark and only for people they have decided at last to trust. That he had never truly stopped looking for her. Not really, that for 2 years he had kept a man in London whose single task was to run down every rumour of a fair woman travelling with a child, and that every rumour had died in his hands, and he understood now precisely why. That he had never married, could not make himself marry, though his uncle had paraded girl after suitable girl before him, because each of them had carried the same great disqualifying fault of not being her. That he had grown hard and strange and solitary, a man who had let the great house fall silent around him and the knocker rust upon the door, telling himself for 5 years that what he felt was anger at a woman who had used him, when all the while it had been grief for a woman who had saved him, and who had let him believe the very worst of her so that he would find the strength to let her go. And Linnet gave him the last of it, the piece she had carried alone. How Osric had come to her in a side room off the ballroom, how he had shown her the forged contract with its false seal, and how, when she wept and swore she would go quietly, he had drawn out a second paper and made her sign it. A renunciation, a document in which she gave up, for herself and for any child she might ever bear, every claim upon the name of Vane, forever. Leander went very still. For any child she might bear, he repeated slowly. Lynette, you did not know yet that you carried Rafe. You said so yourself. You could not have known. I did not. But Osric had you renounce the claims of a child you did not know existed. He was on his feet now, careful of the sleeping boy, and there was something terrible waking in his face. Do you not see what that means? He was not only ridding himself of an unsuitable woman. He was guarding against an heir. 5 years ago, before either of us knew there would ever be a Rafe, my uncle was already building a wall against the day I might get a son. His voice dropped to almost nothing. He is my heir, Lynette. Osric. If I die without a lawful child, everything, the title, the whole of it, falls to him and his line. And a man does not forge a duke's seal and terrorize a girl at a ball to prevent a marriage he merely dislikes. He does it to protect an inheritance he has already spent. The grey light had come up full now, and Leander crossed to the broken window and looked down the long fall of the moor toward the sea, and Lynette watched his back go rigid. He has not sent Crail north to frighten you into silence, Leander said. Silence was never the danger. You have been silent 5 years. The danger, the only danger, is the boy. A living son of mine, breathing at the edge of England, is the one thing on this earth that can undo everything my uncle has built. He turned, and his face was the face of a man who has just seen the whole board at last. He is not coming to make you sign a paper, Lynette. He is coming for Rafe, and he is already here. Far below, on the pale ribbon of the coast road, a black travelling coach was making its way toward Hartsmere in the cold new light, and even at that great distance Lynette could make out the small, bright device painted on its door, the standing stag of the House of Vane. Then we stop running, Leander said. Lynette stared at him. The words were so simple and so impossible that for a moment they made no sense to her at all. Running was what she was. Running was the whole architecture of her life. The beck and the back doors and the coin sewn into hems, and here was this man on a broken moor proposing to tear it down while her enemy's carriage crawled toward the sea below them. We cannot fight him, she said. You told me yourself. The ground is his. He is a lord. I am a woman with a false name and a base-born child. In any room where it is his word against ours, we lose. That is not despair, Leander. It is arithmetic. I have done the sum 1,000 times. You have done the sum as a woman alone, Leander said. You have never once done it as a woman with a duke on her side of the scales, because you have never had one. So do it again. He forged the seal of the House of Vane. That is not a cruelty, Lynette. It is a crime, a hanging crime, and there is one living person in the world who watched him do it and can swear to it. You. And there is one man in the world whose seal it was, who can stand before any magistrate in England and say that no such contract, no such marriage, no such wedding ever existed in his life. Me. He took her cold hands in his. For 5 years he has been safe because the two people who could destroy him were kept apart and kept lied to. He made one mistake. He let us stand in the same room again. We are not going to waste it running. They did not go back to the cottage. Leander sent word down by a shepherd's boy, and within the hour the plan was moving. Rafe, waking clear-eyed and ravenous and entirely restored in the way only small children can be, was carried down to Mrs. Pettifer at the Feathers, with the gander stalking beside him, and strict instruction that he was to eat everything put before him, and on no account to open the door to any gentleman he did not know. Widow Coyle was set to watch the lane, and a fast rider went along the coast to fetch Sir Kester Hale, the magistrate at Coldharbour, a gouty and incorruptible old man who had no love for grand persons and a great love for the letter of the law, with a message under the Duke's own hand begging his immediate attendance on a matter of forgery and the safety of a child. Osric Vane arrived at his nephew's borrowed parlor at the inn a little after noon, and he came smiling. He was a handsome man still, silver at the temples, dressed with the quiet expense of someone who had never in his life worried what a thing cost, and he came into the low room as though he had built it, drawing off his gloves finger by finger. Crail slid in behind him like a shadow that had learned to walk, and behind Crail came two large men who were not introduced and did not need to be. Leander. Osric's voice was warm, wounded, wonderful. My dear boy, what a chase you have led us. When Crail sent word that you had gone herring off to the ends of the earth, I feared for your health. Truly I did. This climate, your leg. His eyes moved to Lynette, standing by the window, and passed over her the way a man's eyes pass over a servant, and came back to his nephew. And I find you keeping company with, forgive me, I am sure there is an explanation, a village herb woman and her child. People will talk, Leander. People are already talking. Come home. Let me take this tiresome business off your hands, as I have taken every tiresome business off your hands since you were a boy. Sit down, uncle, Leander said. We are waiting for one more guest before we begin. Something flickered behind Osric's genial face. Begin what, precisely? Sit down. Osric did not sit. He turned instead to Lynette, and the warmth reshaped itself into something colder and more businesslike, the face, she realized, that he wore when the audience was only her. Mistress Sowerby. We meet again. You have worn better than I would have expected given the life. Let me be plain, since my nephew seems disinclined to spare us. You have had a hard time of it, and that was never my wish. I am a practical man. I have here the means to make the rest of your life comfortable beyond anything you could earn with your little jars. An income. £200 a year, paid quarterly for the whole of your life, and a cottage in a warm county far from here, on one small condition. The boy comes with me. He will be raised as a gentleman, given every advantage, a far better life than a base-born child can hope for at the skirts of a moorland witch. You may even visit him in time, when the talk has died. Refuse, and I promise you nothing but ruin. For you and for him both, I have done it before. Ask my nephew how many of his little attachments have prospered. Lynette looked at the man who had reached into her life 5 years ago and torn the roof off it, and she found, to her own surprise, that she was not afraid of him anymore. She had spent so long afraid of a giant. He was only a frightened man in an expensive coat, trying to buy back a future he had already gambled away. No, she said. Come now. You have misjudged the sum, sir. She heard Leander's earlier words in her own mouth, and something in her lifted. You are offering me £200 a year for the one thing on this earth that is not for sale. You could offer me the whole of England, and I would say the same word, and it is a very short word, and I have already said it. The door opened. Sir Kester Hale came in leaning on a stick, gouty and rumpled and furious at having been made to travel before his dinner, and behind him came his clerk with an inkstand, and the temperature of the room changed entirely. Osric's smile did not falter, but Lynette saw his hand close slowly on the head of his cane. Sir Kester, said Leander, thank you for coming. I will not waste a sick man's afternoon. I wish to lay an information before a magistrate and witnesses concerning a forgery of the Great Seal of the Dukedom of Wexmoor, committed in London 5 winters past by the man before you, my uncle, Osric Vane, for the purpose of deceiving a young woman into surrendering her rightful claims and concealing the existence of my lawful heir. This is madness, Osric said, but the warmth had gone thin. The boy is invention. The woman is a fantasist. There is no proof of any seal, no document, nothing but the word of a discarded mistress against a gentleman of the blood. There is her word, Leander agreed, which Sir Kester may weigh, and there is mine, that no such contract ever existed, which he may weigh against yours. And there is the small matter, uncle, of why a lean man in a lawyer's coat has spent a fortnight combing this coast for a woman and a boy child, on whose instruction, and to what end? He turned. Mr. Crail, you are a man who works for wages, not for love. I will ask you a single question, and you will consider your answer with great care, because Sir Kester is writing it down. Who sent you north, and what were you sent to bring back? The whole room hung on the sour little man. Crail looked at Osric. And Crail, who had spent his whole life reading which way a wind was setting, looked at the magistrate and the duke, and the two large men who were suddenly and conspicuously his employer's only remaining friends, and he made the calculation that men like Crail always make in the end. Mr. Osric Vane, Your Honor, Crail said, unhurried, taking off his hat, retained me in September, to find a woman answering the description, gone to ground some 5 years, with a young boy in her keeping. I was to confirm the child, secure the child, and convey him south to a place of Mr. Vane's choosing, the mother to be paid off or otherwise discouraged as proved needful. It is all in my book of accounts, Your Honor, dates and sums in Mr. Vane's own hand, where he signed the advances. I keep good books. A man in my trade must. Osric moved then, at last. But there was nowhere in the small room to move to, and the two large men had already understood that the wind had changed and taken one quiet step back from him, into the neutral country of men who had merely been standing there. You will destroy yourself, Osric said to Leander, low and vicious, the mask entirely gone now. Do you understand what you are doing? A duke's seal forged, a scandal like this dragged through every court and every paper. You will pull the whole house down to spite me. Your father would be ashamed. My father, said Leander, would have horsewhipped you on the steps of his own house, and I am being a great deal gentler than that. He stepped close to his uncle, and though he did not raise a hand, Osric flinched. Here is what will happen, uncle, and you will listen, because it is the last mercy you will ever have from me. Sir Kester has heard enough to hold you. But a public trial would indeed wound the family, and Rafe will bear the name Vane, and I will not have his first inheritance be his great-uncle swinging from a rope in the papers. So, you will make over to Sir Kester tonight in writing a full accounting of every shilling you have taken from this estate since the day you became its steward. You will resign every interest you hold in my affairs, and you will take yourself out of England on the first tide, to the continent, to wherever your creditors have not yet reached, and you will live there quietly on whatever you have not yet stolen, and you will never again write, speak, or so much as think the name of that child or his mother. Do this, and I let the forgery lie buried. Fail in any part of it, and I will have Crail's book and the lady's testimony before the King's Bench inside the month, and I will spend the whole of the Wexmoor fortune gladly to see you transported. You spent my whole boyhood teaching me how a patient man destroys another. I was an apt pupil, uncle. Now get out of my sight. For a moment, Osric Vane stood in the center of the little room, and Linnet watched every year of his careful, patient, ruinous scheming fall away from him and leave only an aging man with empty hands. Then he turned, without another word, and Crail held the door for him with exquisite civility, and he was gone. The room let out its breath. Sir Kester heaved himself up on his stick, muttering about his dinner, and promised the papers would be drawn and witnessed before he slept, and took his clerk and his inkstand and went. And then, at last, there was only the two of them, and the low fire, and the long afternoon light, and the enormous quiet of a thing that had ruled Linnet's whole life simply being over. She waited for Leander to turn to her, to claim it, and her, and the boy, now that he had won. She would not even have blamed him. He had earned it. He did not. He crossed to the window, and he stood with his back to her for a long moment looking out at the sea, and when he faced her again there was something almost fearful in him, the great grave man gone shy. It is done, he said. He cannot touch you now, either of you, not ever again. Crail's book and the magistrate's paper see to that. You are free, Linnet. Truly free, for the first time since you were 19 years old. Free of him. Free of the running. Free of the false name if you want your own back. He drew a breath. Free of me, if that is what you want. The estate at Cold Harbor is mine, the half-ruined coastal place I came north to look over, the errand that brought me to you by blind chance. I will settle it on Rafe this week in law, so that he wants for nothing all his life whatever you decide, and I will not make it a condition of anything, and I will not sit on your wall again unless you ask me to. His voice was very rough. I have spent this whole day taking your choices back from a man who stole them. I will not turn round now and steal them myself. So I am not going to ask you for anything. I am only going to go down and see that our son eats his dinner, and leave you to want whatever it is you want, alone, without a single soul standing over you telling you what it must be. And he took up his hat, and he went, and left her standing in the middle of the quiet room with the one thing she had never in her whole life been given. A choice. Lynette stood alone in the parlor of the Feathers for a long time. Below her, through the floorboards, she could hear the ordinary music of the inn, the clatter of Mrs. Pettifer's kitchen, the gander complaining about something, and under it all a low, grave voice and a high, delighted one, the Duke of Wexmoor being told, at very great length and with total authority, the correct method of feeding bread to a goose. She could have anything now. That was the vertigo of it. She could take Rafe and the Cold Harbor estate and her own name back and live free and quiet and beholden to no man for the rest of her days, and it would be a good life, a life the girl of 19 at the terrace doors would have wept to be promised. And she found she did not want it, or rather, she wanted all of it, the freedom and the quiet and the name. But she wanted it with the low, grave voice in the next room, and the shy, fearful giant who had won the whole war that afternoon and then handed her back her own life and walked away rather than ask to share it. For 5 years, she had believed that wanting a thing was the surest way to have it taken from her. She was so very tired of believing that. She went down the stairs. He looked up when she came into the kitchen, Rafe on his knee and butter to the child's eyebrows, and the gander eyeing him with grudging detente. And whatever was in her face made him go still and set the boy carefully down. Rafe, Lynette said, go and show Mrs. Pettifer how Admiral bows for bread. I must speak with the Northman. The boy went gladly, and Lynette stood in the warm kitchen and looked at Leander Vane and said the truest and most reckless thing she had said in her life. You forgot to ask me a question, she said. This morning you had one. You have carried it 5 years, you said. I answered the wrong half of it. You asked whether I left you for a richer purse, and I told you no. But you never asked the other thing, the thing underneath. You never asked whether I loved you, and I am too old now and too tired of being brave in the wrong direction to wait another 5 years for a shy man to find his courage. So I will ask it for you. Yes, I loved you at the terrace doors with your leg that would not dance. I loved you every hour of every road. I taught your son your name before he could say it, because I could not bear that he should grow up in a world with no Leander in it at all. Her voice cracked and she let it. You gave me a choice this afternoon and thought it a gift. It is the cruelest gift you could have given me, because there is only one thing I want, and it is the one thing I am too proud to take unless you make me. So make me. Ask. Leander crossed the kitchen. He did not go down on one knee because his leg would not have allowed it, and because neither of them had ever wanted the theater of the thing. He took her 2 hands, the healer's hands, roughened and stained green at the nails, into his scarred ones. I am not a prize, Lynette, he said quietly. I am a lame and difficult man with a temper and a ruined leg and a family I have just had to burn to the ground. I cannot give you a life without talk, because the whole of England will talk. I can only give you the talk and the leg and the temper and everything else I have, which is a great deal of money and one very large draughty house and a heart that has belonged to you since a ballroom 5 years ago and has been no earthly use to anyone in the meantime. His thumb moved over her knuckles. Marry me, not to make Rafe safe. He is safe already. Not to spite my uncle. He is beaten already. Marry me because I sat on your wall all night, and would sit there every night of my life sooner than be warm without you. Stay, just stay, and let me stay with you. That is the whole of the question. It always was. Yes, said Linnet Sowerby. Yes, you difficult man, yes. They were married 11 days later, in the small salt-stained chapel above Hartsmere Harbour, with the whole village crammed into the pews in their Sunday best, and the wind off the sea trying the door the entire while. Linnet did not wear white, and she did not wear London silk. She wore a gown the colour of the sea just before rain, made by the village women in a week of joyful conspiracy, and she carried a knot of late sea holly and rosemary from her own garden. And she looked, the fishermen agreed afterward over their ale, like something that belonged to the coast and always had. Rafe walked before her down the short aisle, carrying the ring on a cushion with the ferocious concentration of a boy entrusted with the fate of nations, and behind him, uninvited and undeterred, came Admiral, who processed up the aisle like a small white bishop and settled himself at the altar rail and, to the vicar's visible alarm, appeared to preside. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Leander bent his head and kissed her, once, without hurry, a kiss that was less acclaiming than an arrival, the kiss of a man who has walked a very long way and has finally, at the cold, grey edge of the country, come home. The news reached London within the week, and it did not land as a scandal. It landed as a wonder. The reclusive Duke of Wexmoor, long thought a confirmed and difficult bachelor, had married a village healer at the far end of nowhere and legitimized in the same stroke a son of near 5 years with the unmistakable grey eyes of the old Duchess. The drawing rooms did not know whether to be appalled or enchanted, and so, being drawing rooms, they were both exhaustively for a whole season. As for Osric Vane, it was quietly understood that the Duke's uncle had gone abroad for his health, to somewhere warm and cheap and beyond the reach of English creditors, and that he was not expected to return, and that it was best not to inquire too closely why. His name went out of fashion in a single afternoon, which in London is the nearest thing there is to death. Spring came late that year, as it always did to that coast. And then all at once. The moor above Hartsmere went from iron to green to a sudden riot of gorse the colour of struck matches, and the sea turned from slate to a blue that hurt to look at, and the physic garden behind the cottage, which Linnet refused absolutely to give up, though she was a duchess now, and Wexmoor lay 100 draughty miles to the south, put up its new green in orderly rows. She was there among them on an afternoon in May, on her knees in the good black earth, when a shadow fell across the row, and she looked up to find her husband watching her with the particular expression he wore when he thought she was not looking. The expression that still, after everything, she could hardly bear the sweetness of. "You are meant to be a great lady now," Leander said. "Great ladies do not kneel in the dirt." "This one does." She sat back on her heels, brushing the soil from her hands onto her apron, and it was the same gesture she had made the morning he arrived, and neither of them missed that it was, and both of them smiled. "Where is your son?" "Our son," Leander said, "is teaching a duke's grandmother's goose to fetch, down on the shore and losing badly, and could not be happier." He lowered himself carefully onto the low garden wall, the bad leg stretched before him, and watched her work. On the stones beside him he set down a small, bright thing that caught the sun. The compass. He left this on the breakfast table. He says he does not need it anymore. I asked him why, since he was so very fond of showing me north with it, and do you know what he said? Tell me. He said he does not need a compass to find north, because north is wherever we are. Leander turned the little brass thing over in his scarred fingers, the same fingers that had fished it out of a tide pool on the worst and best morning of his life. "You carried this out of that ballroom. 5 years. You could have sold it 100 times over in the hard winters, and you never did." "No," Linnet said. "I never did." "Why?" She looked at him, the difficult, lame, swoon-worthy wreck of a man she had run halfway across England to protect and been found by anyway, and she gave him the truest answer she had. "Because a compass always points home," she said. even when you cannot go there. And I needed to believe, on the nights I did not think I would last till morning, that there was still a north somewhere, and that it was pointed at you. She reached up and closed his hand over it, the way he had once closed a small boy's hand over it on a cold shore. Keep it. We are both home now. Neither of us has any more need to find our way. There is a kind of running that is cowardice, and there is a kind that is the last brave thing a soul can do. Lynette Sowerby had done the brave kind once, and paid for it with 5 hard years at the edge of the world. But she understood now, kneeling in her garden with her son shouting at a goose on the shore below and her impossible husband warm and solid on the wall beside her, that bravery had never really been the leaving. The leaving had been easy in its way. The truly brave thing, the thing she had not known she had in her until a duke sat all night on a cold wall and refused to go, was the staying, and she meant to be brave now for the whole of the rest of her life.